Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tennessee Women's Political Program on Restorative Justice and the Criminal Justice System. If you follow local politics, you have probably heard the phrase restorative justice discussed by many of the candidates running for office in our May primary. It was not uncommon to hear a candidate say that they have the edge when it comes to restorative justice over their opponent, or that they will implement restorative practices in their courtrooms if elected. It's interesting to note that the Tennessee Department of Corrections Victim Services also provides a voluntary victim offender dialogue program that gives victims of crime an opportunity to have a face-to-face, a structured meeting with their offender who has victimized them, should they desire. And in my humble opinion, the interest in restorative justice demonstrates our society's strong interest in having non-carceral alternatives to sentencing in the criminal justice system. So all of this begs the question of what exactly is restorative justice? And who drives the process? Is it the victim, the defendant, the judge, or all of the above? Should it be implemented only with juveniles accused of committing crimes like stealing low-value items? Or can it be extended to adult court as well? And of course, the biggest question always looms of whether restorative justice can ever be appropriate with violent offenses. Today, we're going to try our best to wrap our arms around some of these questions, and we put together a panel of folks who have truly been in the trenches, so to speak, with restorative justice. I want to introduce them now to you. Travis Claybrooks is the founder and CEO of the Rafa Institute, where he confronts and solves root causes of social harm in the urban South. Travis is a former police officer. He served in our United States Army, and he is a former child advocate in the nonprofit sector. Valerie Craig is the co-founder of Tennessee Voices for Victims, and Valerie facilitates victim impact programs for incarcerated men, women, and juveniles. She is a trained facilitator for victim offender dialogue and the Juvenile Restorative Justice Program implemented by the Rafa Institute. And lastly, we have Anna Biddle, and Anna currently works in the trucking industry where she's joining us today, literally on the road. Anna is a Nashville native. She is a mother of 3 children. And Anna is a rape survivor, and I met her when I was assigned to prosecute her offender's case. This year, we took the case to trial, and we're going to speak today about a meeting that took place between Anna and her offender. Personally, Anna's case gives me hope that there is space in the restorative justice realm for both forgiveness and accountability. My name is Jenny Charles, and I work as an assistant district attorney, and I'm going to be your moderator today. If anyone has any questions during the program that come to mind, just send them to me over in the chat feature on Zoom. And I first, before we get into our program, I want to recognize our newly elected judge of Criminal Court Division 6 in Davidson County, who's on the program today, Cindy Chappell. So congratulations on your win, Judge Chappell.
Thank you,
Jenny. All right, I want to begin by reading off Wikipedia's definition that popped up on a Google search when I typed in restorative justice. Restorative justice is an approach to justice where one of the responses to a crime is to organize a meeting between the victim and the offender, sometimes with representatives of the wider community. I want to go to Travis first and ask, is there an agreed upon definition of restorative justice amongst social workers, criminologists, criminal justice professionals? or are we dealing with something that is just not yet defined?
Well, this is a very good question, Jenny, and thank you for facilitating this and for opening this conversation. And thank you to everyone in the space today who is allowing us to be here and to give us your attention and your attention to this subject, which I think is a very important subject. And I think it's important to recognize in response to your question, Jenny, that so-called restorative justice, so-called restorative practices have been around for centuries. Indigenous people groups the world over have been using circle processes, restorative processes, community conferencing processes, all of these things that we have attached modern terms to. They've been using them for centuries to respond to harm when harm has happened in their community, whatever the community is, the tribe, the village, whatever it might be. And so this is not new. It is not a new thing. It is not something that Howard Zehr, who might be considered the father of modern contemporary restorative justice practices in the Western criminal legal context. He did not, suddenly discover this thing or come up with this idea. It's been around for a long time. I think it's important to say that. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are borrowing from first people groups from around the world, and we are making an effort to adapt these ideas, these ethics, these ways of seeing and approaching life to a criminal legal context, right? In the modern criminal legal context. So largely, and I say all of that to arrive at what I think is somewhat of an answer to your question. Of course not. There is no standard definition. That's like saying, okay, somebody define God or something like that, right? It's just lots of people have practiced it lots of different ways in lots of different circumstances. But I can say that there are certain guiding principles that govern it wherever you might find it working well, right? The person who harm is owned by the community, right? It's the property of the community. It belongs to the community. It must be accounted for. It can't just, nothing can happen. People who have been harmed deserve a response to the needs that are created when they are harmed. Needs are created when harm happens, and those needs deserve to be responded to be acknowledged, to be met. People who cause harm oftentimes come from being harmed, not all the time. That is not an excuse, but it might explain. And that also must be accounted for. When people cause harm, there is a responsibility to account for the harm that they caused. And there is a responsibility to the greatest extent possible to repair it, to make it right, and to transform in such a way that they never do that again. And so these are some of the guiding principles. I also want to say, quite frankly, and maybe hopefully this does not dissipate into the space, but that we can actually hold on to this, that while in many restorative justice processes, people intentionally bring together the person who has been harmed and the person who has caused harm in some sort of a dialogue or some sort of a conversation. We at Rafa Institute, and there are many other spaces where restorative practices, restorative justice practices are engaged that do not necessarily include that. That is to say that that is not a necessary outcome or process for a restorative justice process to take place. And we can talk more about that later. It oftentimes does include that moment, that meeting, but it does not have to include that meeting and still have and hold some of the principles that I just mentioned. Lastly, I'll say our definition at Refi Institute is this, and I'll type it into the chat. And even as I type it into the chat, and even as I speak it, I want to acknowledge that it continues. The more we practice it, the more we learn about it, and our definition continues to evolve, right? And so I'm actually giving you a recent evolution of Jenny, from the last time I was with your colleagues. It has evolved just a little bit. We are thinking of restorative justice as an outcome of restorative practices, where we practice and hold an ethos of accounting for harm as it moves through a community, but we do that in ways that do not cause more harm. So key elements there, it's an ethos, it's accounting for harm, it's recognizing that harm travels and that our responses to it must not cause more harm. So that's our working definition. That's what guides our practices.
Let me ask you one quick question, and then I want to shift to Valerie. Travis, so in your definition, and I appreciate you giving us the broad definition, your organization's definition, can restorative justice exist where there is a lengthy prison sentence attached?
Well, Jenny.
I'm asking tough questions today.
I should have known when I subjected myself to a prosecutor that I would get easy questions. No, this is a very, very, very good question. So I want to say, I don't want to introduce or play into the binary thinking around. Okay. I actually want us to think about spaces of both and neither nor, right? So on the one hand, restorative justice processes, when it is interfacing with our criminal legal system, in my opinion, can be useful and introduced at any and many points in the criminal legal process, from pre-arrest all the way to the surveillance phase when we think about probation and parole, right? So at any space, pre-prosecution, post-prosecution, pre-adjudication, post-adjudication, pre-sentencing, post-sentencing, in conjunction with, there can be appropriate times and spaces for processes to be introduced there. However, when we think about responses to harm that do not cause more harm, and when we think about solutions to community safety, when we think about the reality that most people who are incarcerated return to the community in which they lived, and we plop in the middle of that, what happens to you when you're incarcerated? This is a very harmful place that causes not only harm to an individual, but it makes it more likely that that individual will cause more harm. This is data driven. As we like to say in our community, if incarceration alone made us safer, we would be the safest nation in human history. And we know that just isn't true. The other aspect of that, Jenny, is, what do people who have been harmed want? That's a question that rarely gets asked. And certainly it's a question around which there are very few processes. What do people who have been harmed, what do they need in response, in the aftermath of violence, in the aftermath of harm, right? And I would prefer for us to begin including in our work processes that legitimately ask that question, and then legitimately have processes for pursuing that and allowing that to prevail. without disrespect to the idea of community safety, without disrespect to the idea that we all need to be safe, not just the person who was harmed in a specific case. So yes and no, neither nor, both and. I want us to expand our vista of that, certainly away from the idea that all we need to do is put people in prison and that's going to solve our problem, and it's going to satisfy people who have been harmed. We just know that that is not true.
Thank you for that. That was a great answer, Travis. We can have everything, is what I'm hearing you say, and I agree. I want to let's go to Valerie next. Valerie, can you give us an overview of what is happening in Nashville's criminal justice system, both in the juvenile courts and in our adult courts, in terms of restorative justice? What are you and Travis working on? Are there any other groups in this space that are doing work? And if so, what are they doing?
Well, I think, as a victim advocate who has worked in, just different avenues over the course of our career. I mean, one of the things that I can just echo real quickly before I jump to where you took me, Jenny, is what Travis was just talking about, is that there is, I think, space for all of the different things. And I think it's probably necessary to have space for all of the different things. If we are going to be serious, when crime happens, three entities begin to be pulled into it. And that is the community, that is the individual who is now the victim or the person harmed. And then that is also the person who caused the harm, or the offender, depending on the language that's being used in that moment. And so I think we have to look at systems that look at all three of those things. And so when we had the opportunity a couple of years ago to come alongside Rafah launched, and Travis really can speak to that clearer probably than I can, because he has been intimately involved in all of the ins and outs of working in the juvenile justice system. But what I can tell you as a victim advocate is that the singular reason that we decided as an agency and as an entity to come alongside a restorative justice program is because of Rafah's interest and willingness to keep that victim-centered approach, meaning that the victim themselves had the opportunity to do what Travis was just talking about. How did they want to address their harm? What was meaningful to them after being harmed? Obviously, as a victim advocate, it also felt safer to talk about it from a juvenile justice perspective and on those low-level crimes. As we began to see that that system was effective in terms of not only allowing people who have been harmed or those victims to have a voice in what they wanted, and to have a very active participation. I mean, I think that that's one of the things about restorative justice for certain individuals, for certain victimizations, having the opportunity to have that active piece of that. So much of what happens in a traditional criminal justice is a very passive thing for the victim. Other people are doing things, but the victim is just constantly having to respond. And so it's not even maybe passive, it's reactive. They're responding to what other people are saying or doing or thinking. And in a restorative justice approach that truly is victim-centered, and I will just say that most that I have encountered are not victim-centered. I think that Travis and his team have done a good job in holding that space and keeping that victim-centered approach. And because of that, I think that trust has been built across certain entities, and including going into the adult system. Seeing some of the conversations and things along that, as well as looking at higher level crimes happening from juveniles now. I think that there is certainly space in looking at how do we have community safety? How do we have that the person who has been harmed, having that harm healed, as well as looking at the environment these individuals are coming out of, the people who have caused the harm, and allowing them space to actually repair it themselves. That accounting process versus just having a consequence. I think that is one of the markers that begin to set apart restorative justice, which is why I do think that there would probably be, if it was done correctly, I think that there is space to have some restorative practices that can be applied alongside maybe some of our traditional criminal justice, the prison system, those types of things, to allow the individual who actually created the harm to account for the harm, which is, as I said, very different than just having a consequence that somebody once again says you have to do, and they are just passively accepting that. So, it's very exciting to see a program like this done well. It's exciting to hear feedback from victims and to see victims who are able to move through a process and begin to experience healing in ways that the traditional system does not always account for. And I think that, as I said, as long as those parameters are around there and there is some good foundational work that is done, I think that there is space for that expansion. But I think it is constantly asking the question of community safety, victim-centeredness, and how do we create a space where no other harm is happening, not necessarily for the benefit of the person who caused the harm, frankly, but for the benefit of everybody else.
So let me ask you and Travis, feel free to hop in this question. So we have our juvenile court, and that is Judge Sheila Calloway, and then we have our adult system, and I believe we have 13 general sessions judges and then 6 criminal court divisions. Let's start in our juvenile system. Let's say a juvenile goes out and tries to break into a car. They enter the system. They're charged with burglary of an automobile. And it just very practically tell us what opportunities for restorative justice would that child have?
Go ahead, Travis.
So in a case like that, which is a case type that we currently take via our MOU with juvenile court and with the DA's office and with the public defender and the police department, that case would more than likely be diverted to us prior to prosecution, prior to a petition, which is what a charge is called in juvenile court. It would be referred to us. We would staff that case. We would reach out to the person harmed. We would reach out to the responsible young person. We would share with them what we do, invite them to participate in the process. If they both agree to the process, we then move forward with the process. We work with them individually, and at the appropriate time, bring them together for a community restoration conference, them as well as supporters that represent the community. And a plan, a restoration plan is created by that group of people. Our facilitators simply facilitate the process. Once that plan is complete, case is over.
And all along the way, people have the opportunity to choose not to participate. I mean, and so that can happen from the very get-go, where you may have somebody who says, yeah, you know what, I'm not doing that. And I think, obviously the conversation that's important to have alongside of that, so many people, and of course, I'm sure everybody on here probably recognize that, but there's so many victims who they have this idea of what court is going to offer them, and what that looks like is obviously very, familiar from television shows and those kinds of things. And so they have this idea of what, justice looks like. And, part of that conversation is helping them identify what justice means to them. But for so many of them, especially with these low-level crimes, there isn't going to be a lot that happens per se that aligns with their preconceived idea of what to expect in a court system. So a lot of times it's having that nuanced conversation of helping them understand that what is reality and what their expectations are. How do you best go about getting that? Because I think so often people hear about restorative justice and they think that this is, a soft on crime kind of approach. And the reality is, in a restorative justice process, not only is the victim agreeing, across the board, and as I said, at any point they can pull back. And if they decide that they do not want to move forward, then that case would just go back into the traditional system at that particular point. That's what I mean about having it be held in that victim-centered spot, because it is really giving a lot of that power back to the person who lost that power. But it is also looking at, in this particular case, these cases, the youth, and saying to them, are you willing to account for this? Are you willing not to just say you did this, are you willing to actually account for it? Not totally knowing what that's going to mean at the end of that conference, because you're going to get into that conference and you're going to have a conversation, and we don't know exactly where that is going to land, and what the victim is going to be asking for in terms of repairing the harm and that type of thing. And so, it's everything from having the conversation of, if you did not do this, then you should get yourself an attorney and go back into the court system, starting there with individuals, all the way through to that willingness of saying, this is not just saying you did it. This is now saying, not only did I do it, but I want to repair it. And that is where the power begins to come in at the very beginning. But as I said, at any point, any participant is able to say, I don't want to continue doing this.
And that's critically important to the process. I know you probably had a question to jump in with Jenny, but that's critically important to the process, really, for everyone. This is not something, at least at this stage, it is not something that is mandated by the court. And I think it's important for us, as we think about, expanding into this kind of space, that it doesn't work for everybody, for whatever the reason. It is not for everyone, but should it be available to everyone who it could work for? Yes. And that's one of the things I'm pressing, is make it an option and an opportunity for people, and those for whom it can work, let them have it. For those for whom it may not work, okay, no problem.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. Let me just ask both of you real quick, and then I want to go to Anna. Let's say 30-year-old goes out and does the same thing, tries to break into an individual's automobile. Let's say they steal a gun, so they're in adult court. Are there opportunities for restorative justice in Nashville's adult system?
So, yes, as much as there is the opportunity to stop on the side of the road and pick a flower. The cool thing is that we have a process now, right? We have a process. We have that. Will we? And I think Judge McMullen just asked, is this something that can happen statewide? Yeah, absolutely. Simply call us if you're a prosecutor, or you're a judge, or a defense attorney, or you're a person who's just been harmed, and you want to think about doing something different. We facilitate these kinds of things. And incidentally, and I don't want to make this trite, but I think it's an important thing. You use the example of a 30-year-old. I'm going to use an example of a 22-year-old, right? Someone who's not so far from the age of 18, right? That age 18 is kind of that cutoff that we've said, okay, you're an adult, you're not. But the reality is, I know when I was 22, I probably had a whole lot of 16 in me also, right? I had some 22 in me, but I also had a bunch of 16 in me, right? And again, these ideas are not are not excuses, but I want to blur the line for the sake of this conversation. I want to blur the line just a little bit between juvenile and adult. I think these processes, from the person causing harm perspective, can be equally meaningful, whether it's happening when I was 16 or it's happening when I'm 22. I can still account in meaningful ways for the harm that I caused if given the opportunity. And for a person who's been harmed, hey, I don't care how old you are, you stole my car, you robbed me, you did whatever you did to me. It still hurts. It still is impacting me. Yeah, we might think differently about a 14-year-old than we would a 30-year-old, but the pain, the impact, like what happened to me, it doesn't matter whether you were 14 or you were 30, it still hurt, right? And I still need repair, and I have needs, and those needs deserve a response. They deserve a meaningful response. And so I think that these opportunities should be available across the span of our court system, whether you're in juvenile court or adult court.
And I think the kind of tag team on top of that, yes. I mean, I think that, the process is there, it can be applied. I think it's looking at how to best apply it, to once again, to maintain all of that safety, those safety pieces. And then the other thing, Jenny, that you had talked about during the introduction that is also available, but it is different, but that it may be a program that people are a little bit more familiar with in restorative justice, just to kind of give it a quick this is this and that is that kind of thing, but that's the victim offender dialogue. And so victim offender dialogue actually would happen the way that it's set up in Tennessee, and in most of the states that I'm familiar with. The way that it is set up is that is actually after incarceration. And so it's a victim driven program. Again, it is one that a victim would ask if they could talk with their offender, and then there are facilitators in our state that then would work with both individuals. But it is a little bit different of methodology in terms of, in a victim offender dialogue, there is really not, at the heart of it, there's not really meant to be surprises. Like there is meant to be you have a pretty clear idea of where both people are coming from and the things that they want to say. And the facilitator's role is really in prepping what that other person is going to hear. So you get into some of the nitty gritty with that. The restorative justice process is more organic. And so what you're doing on the front end is, as facilitators, we work with both parties to help them really get language around what they want to say, help them identify kind of where they are emotionally, help them think through maybe how, if a certain emotion is presented, how would that land on you? Just allowing them to think through, well, how's the best way that I can prepare? But it is not at all about sharing each other's stories. I mean, that is very much what they do in that moment together. And so there's strengths, I think, in both. I mean, I think that when we're thinking through those different approaches, I think there's strengths, and of course there's weaknesses, I think, with both of those as well. But I just wanted to clarify that there is another program out there, but that is past the court process. So that victim offender dialogue would not happen until an incarceration process was already in place.
Okay, yeah, that's an important clarification. Thank you. I want to shift to Anna's story now. I've worked in the criminal justice system in several different roles for almost 16 years. And so I've seen a wide array of horrible actions that one human being can do to another. So I would say that nothing really surprises me anymore. And when I read what was on the affidavit of what happened to Anna, I was very angry. And it just sort of took it to a new level. I want to give you an overview of the crime and then go to Anna. Two men decided to rob a hotel out off of Old Hickory Boulevard. It's kind of on the cusp of Williamson County and Davidson County, but it was in Davidson County. And this was a hotel that Anna was working in with her coworker by the name of Natalie. This happened in the middle of the day, and two men came in dressed. They were dressed in all black. They had face mask on, and they had pellet guns that resembled real guns in every sense. A man by the name of Lewis Steele took Anna around the back of the front desk and made her empty the cash registers. And his co-defendant, Tony Gooch, held Natalie and Anna's son in the front of the hotel. Anna's son had come over. It was after school and he was working on his homework. After Lewis Steele collected all of the money that the hotel had from Anna, he forced her to perform oral sex on him as he held her at gunpoint. And based on the DNA that he left behind, we were able to identify him. Both men were caught about 15 minutes later on the interstate. Both defendants were charged. Well, Lewis Steele was charged with aggravated rape and aggravated kidnapping, as well as aggravated robbery. And Tony Gooch was charged with aggravated kidnapping and aggravated robbery. Lewis Steele stood up at trial and pled guilty to the aggravated rape in front of the jury, but he pled not guilty to the aggravated kidnapping. So we started out the trial proceeding on both men. And during the trial, Lewis Steele actually took the stand and testified that he participated in the crime along with his co-defendant, Tony Gooch. I've tried a lot of cases, and there were a lot of firsts in this trial. It was kind of like being on a roller coaster. During the trial, Anna expressed to me a desire to speak with Lewis Steele. And Lewis Steele was in jail, and he had been in jail since his arrest. So I let the court know what Anna desired to do. And I think that was probably the first time he had that request. I know it was the first time I had the request. And so Lewis Steele and his attorney and Anna and myself went into the visitation area of the holding cell in the courtroom, and we had a face-to-face conversation. I did not say anything, nor did his attorney, but Anna and Lewis Steele got to speak. Again, I never received a request like that, but my thinking was, you know what, if that is part of her healing, why not? She's leading this process. She is driving this. So, and I did not think that he was gonna say anything to further harm her. So they got to have a meeting. And I want to shift to Anna now, and you say as much or little as you want to, but when I first met you after this crime had occurred and we went in and had the preliminary hearing, you were understandably very angry and traumatized. By the time the trial rolled around, you were in a place where you wanted to meet him. And from what I gathered, it was very important to you to express forgiveness to him. And there was about 3 years between the arrest and the trial. So time may have played a part in your healing. I don't know. But if you could tell us about that process of getting to a place where you wanted to speak with him, and whether that face-to-face meeting was a necessary part of the healing process for you.
So as Jenny said, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As Jenny said, in the beginning, I was angry. I was angry and I wanted whatever could possibly be done to this man, to both men actually, but especially to the one that did rape me. Of course, COVID hit, so it kind of delayed our and things like that. So it just put more time for me to have to deal with this on a daily basis. I'm a God-fearing woman, and I've been in church all my life. And for me, we have choices in life. You know, um, I could have chose to stay angry and allow that anger to control me. You know, I felt like for myself to move forward, being that I also have children to set an example for, to move forward with my life, I needed to forgive him. I needed to forgive him 100% for me, but also for him. I don't know what he went through, what he's going through, but he had a choice as well, and he chose to do what he did. You know, like maybe somehow, some way, by him knowing, by me actually telling him that I forgave him, I didn't even care. It didn't even matter anymore what had happened or whatever at this point. I just needed him to know that I forgave him, that somehow during his rehabilitation time, maybe he would actually change, for the better. He's young, you know, maybe um and like I told him, I don't want him to spend the rest of his life in prison. You know, I'm I'm not that type of woman. I can't hold that. I don't hold grudges because those things can kill you. They eat you up inside. They make you make wrong decisions, and I just refuse to be that woman. I needed to be strong, and I needed just to continue to move on. Has I don't think about it. I'm thinking about it now, of course, because we're talking about it. You know, I did tell him that, I pray for him daily. I pray for his family daily. I pray that when he comes out, that he's gonna do better, something with his life, and that's what I expect. That's gonna even make me feel even better. I told him that at the point that we even went to try, they could have let him go. I was just that over the situation, and I had already made in my mind that no matter what happened at trial, that this is what I needed to do for myself. There's so many times that people think bad things like these happen, especially to women, and they go into depression or they go into drugs or alcohol, whatever it is to help them feel like they're fixing themselves or helping the problem. And I don't agree to that for myself. I have too much to live for, and I'm not going to let him take my life away from me. I was not going to allow him to take my life away. So that's why I did what I did.
Thank you. And I don't know that I've ever met someone who has really done a 180 in terms of what you've done. Most people start out angry, and by the time we get to trial or a plea takes place, however the case resolves itself, they are just as angry. So let me ask you this. Do you have any advice? And I'm asking truly as a practitioner because it helps me. Do you have any advice, therapy, giving it time, um, journaling that you could give to other victims who are in the same position as you on how to move through this process and hopefully come to a better place at the end?
Absolutely. I went to therapy with the victims um, advocate that they have at the police station off of Murfreesboro Road at the new police station. I went to therapy once a week. I think talking definitely helps a situation. No matter how I think no matter how big or how bad the situation is, I think having somebody to talk to, even just to listen, whether they say anything or not, I think that helps. You're able to express yourself without somebody judging you or telling you you're wrong or whatever it may be. Um, I'm also I write, so I do have a journal, um, and what I call my prayer book. And I write in it every day. I think that some things you may not want to express verbally, you write it down on paper. Then you can go back and read it or whatever it is, to help you build your confidence level back up, to give you that push. Um, if you don't have that support within your family or your friends, um, I would definitely find somebody. you know I did have that support. I had my family, I had my girlfriends there to support me. A few of them even came to the trial, to the pre-trial, things like that, and have been there almost every step of the way. With my mom still alive, she was here to support me. So that would be my advice, to make sure you have, and it has to be a positive support system. It can't be somebody who's negative. You need somebody who's willing to build you back up, not keep you at that level of how you were, when it happened, or keep pushing you. Well, you have to do this, because he needs to do this or she needs to do that. No, it doesn't have to be like that. you know Again, it's about choices though. You have a choice. You have a choice whether you want to stay in the dumps, or you have a choice whether you want to smile every day. I choose to smile every day.
Let me ask you this, Anna. As a prosecutor, the first and foremost thing on my mind with every case is how to craft a sentence to prevent future harm, to prevent the defendant from doing whatever they're accused of doing to another person in the future. Are you worried that he will do the same thing to another person, or do you not think about that? Are you hopeful?
I don't think that's in his history, as far as the sexual assault. I know that he's done some things in his past. You know, I don't think this is the first robbery for him. This might be one of the biggest ones that he's done, but I don't want to sit here and say that I think that he's going to do that again.
Yeah.
I want to say that I think that he's not going to do that again. I want to say that me coming face to face with him after what he did with me, being able to look at me in my face and to hear my voice, you know, hopefully that will be a positive change in his life, in his mind, in his thought process. You know, if he didn't change, maybe if he decided to do it again when he gets out, then maybe he'll remember that day that we got to see him in the visitation room and what I said to him. Maybe that will make him turn around. You know, that's what I hope for. I hope that he does change, and that this will never happen again, and that he can have a second chance at life, to be the man that he should be.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And I want to thank you so much for appearing today and telling your story. And thank you for your courage and your clarity of voice. It's it's it was one of the most impactful moments for me in my career to see that happen. And at the time, I had complicated feelings about it because I didn't want him to hurt you any further. But I think what came out of it was nothing but good. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Anna,
you.
for sharing your story and just your
Thank you.
bravery and your courage, and to be that, to be that example. I mean, to put that out there and to take that risk, because you didn't know what was going to happen when you went into that room that day. And so, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
you're remarkable. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't think that anyone would be against what occurred between Anna and her offender. But Travis, you came and you and Valerie both came and spoke at the district attorney's office about what you were doing. And you said something that stuck in my mind. You said that some in the community give you pushback on restorative justice. And specifically, you mentioned church pastors have been some of the most, I don't want to say negative, maybe skeptical. So I want to speak to that because I imagine their concerns are probably shared by many others. And for me, why I approach restorative justice ultimately as open-minded, but still somewhat skeptical, is because restorative justice, it rests on a big assumption. And that assumption is that the person who has done the harm is self-aware enough to recognize the hurt that they've caused, and they will not cause future harm to others. And it sort of assumes a massive transformation is going to take place after a meeting. And, you know, someone who places their penis in a stranger's mouth while holding her at gunpoint, I wonder, do they have the ability to empathize? Is the ability to empathize there at all? And so at the end of the day, you know, I think the skeptics would say, are we hoping for a transformation that may not be possible in some people? But then on the other hand, if you can take an offender, whether they have murdered someone, whether they have raped someone, and engender in them an empathetic response, I would submit that goes a long way for public safety. So what do you have to say about the doubters?
Yeah. I mean, you are raising, I mean, you're capturing some of the so many important things. And I need to say with my voice, Anna, thank you. Thank you for, I put it in the chat, but you need to hear me say thank you for sharing. Thank you for holding in whatever way you've held this experience. And thank you for using it for good. It was not intended for you, but you are using it for a good thing, and God bless your soul. So Jeannie, I'm gonna disagree with you just a little bit on the idea that people who cause harm know certain things. I'm going to actually hold that restorative justice is so powerful because they don't know. And that we currently have systems and processes that don't help them to know any more after the fact than they did before the impact of what they did. Like, they don't know. As I listened to Anna, I was so reminded of a truth that we hold internally here, and that we are guided by, and that is, when people cause harm, they generally don't know how to account for it. They must learn. They generally do not know how to account for it. The notion that accountability, that the ability to account for harm when we cause it, that we inherently have that, it's a fallacy. It's not true. And here's my evidence. Mr. Steele, there was no way for him to truly know. Yeah, he can know what he did in terms of the actions that he did and the choices that he made, but he cannot truly know what he did. I'm talking about the unspoken stuff, the impact of what he did. There is only one person on planet Earth who could help him know what he did, and that's Miss Biddle. Her voice is the only voice that could convey to him what he truly did, and therefore he cannot truly account for it without hearing from her.
But he would have also known that it was illegal.
Well, we're beyond, and restorative justice moves beyond the legality of a thing, right?
It does move beyond that, but that is part of it, because that's the part that brings him into being able to be in restorative justice.
No doubt. I'm speaking to the power of restorative justice in a case like this. And again, I want to say that it's not for everyone, but the power of a restorative justice process towards transformation is that you suddenly come face to face with something beyond I broke a law. You come face to face with something beyond I committed a crime, right? Those are completely objective, impersonal, non-human ideas. A law was broken, and there is a punishment for my crime. But when we get into the impact of your actions on a human being, you know, Ms. Biddle talked about her children. She talked about wanting to smile and her smile being taken away by implication. And every other thing that she has not disclosed to us that this has meant in her life, right? For Mr. Steele to account for that and to be transformed by the knowledge of what he did beyond the law breaking, but to be transformed by the knowledge and to build and to gain empathy, something that can help in that process. And I'm going to say something after this, but something that can help in that process is actually hearing, dude, here is what you did. No, let me tell you what you did. We're not talking about TCA code here. We're talking about Anna Biddle code right here. Let me tell you what you did, right? Now, does that suggest that this is Anna's responsibility? Is this her responsibility? No, it is not her responsibility. We would all hope that we would all have an awareness of this before we would do these things. And most of us do. But given that it did happen, we have to ask ourselves, what shall we do in response? What shall we do in response? And again, what restorative justice processes gives to us all is an opportunity for us to respond, in addition to many things, for us to respond to the person who's caused the harm in a way that helps them to truly understand what they did, so that as he returns, to your question, Jenny, as he returns to the community, as he comes back, he now has something that he would have never had before that is a deterrent. It's a much greater deterrent than fear of punishment. It's the story of Miss Biddle. It's a story of what he did. That is a deterrent. That's a much greater deterrent in his own mind, because the next time, I would imagine, the next time the notion comes into his mind that he's going to go rob and rape somebody, he will have this real life experience that he sat face to face and he looked into her eyeballs and he listened to her. And if she cried, he heard that. Whatever the experience was, he is carrying that. So I think that's what these kinds of opportunities give to us by way of deterrence.
I love that. And I think you're probably right. I want to bring you on as my co-counsel in my next trial. You're a very powerful orator.
Well, but it's hard. To your point, it's hard because, and I think Ms. Biddle hit on it. When it first happened, I was angry, she said. I was angry, and who wouldn't be? Yeah. I was angry, and that's deserved. It's righteous indignation. It is supposed to be there. It is a part of our DNA. That anger is supposed to be there because it's what keeps us safe. It makes us hypervigilant so that hopefully it stops. It doesn't happen to me again, and I'm protecting myself. That anger is supposed to be there. But like many of those kinds of emotions, we cannot live with them for long. They are not designed for us to live with them for a long time. Those kinds of things kill us. Literally, they kill us. And so, but does that mean that the harm just suddenly dissipated into thin air? No, I still need some way to process this and to continue to process this. And maybe, I don't want to speak for Ms. Biddle, but maybe one of the most powerful things for her was the time. Time went by for her to move through the anger and to find something in her higher mind that she could then begin to tap into to begin to further process this, to bring this pain forward and then to process it further. And you, Jenny, gave her a practical process in court to somewhat do that. And what if we could expand that little kernel, that little nugget, and make it an available opportunity for more and more and more people who might find themselves in the same space that Ms. Biddle was in. I think that would be a beautiful thing.
I agree. And you and Valerie's numbers are both going on my speed dial because I'm going to be using you. And I don't think that restorative justice is a fad at all. I think it'll only grow. I think it'll grow in Davidson County, and I think it's going to grow statewide. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you to all three of our panelists for your time and for giving your voices today. I feel like we could go for another hour, but this has really been an impactful conversation. And everyone have a great day and go in peace. Thank you.
Thank you.